Have you ever locked eyes with someone at exactly the wrong place, only to realize they had been looking for you all along? I used to think my boss only existed beneath the cold white lights of our downtown office tower, dressed in tailored charcoal suits, carrying an espresso in one hand and impossible expectations in the other. Adrian Brooks was the kind of CEO people lowered their voices around. Meetings became quieter when he walked in. Conversations stopped the second he looked up from his tablet. His reputation wasn't built on shouting or intimidation. It was built on precision. He remembered every deadline, every missed detail, every employee's name, and somehow that made him even more intimidating. I had worked for Brooks Creative for nearly 18 months, and in all that time, I had never seen him smile for more than a second. To me, he was simply my boss, a man whose approval felt as unreachable as the skyline outside our office windows. That Friday had been brutal. Our biggest campaign of the year had fallen apart after a client changed the entire direction less than 24 hours before presentation day. By the time I left the office, my shoulders felt like concrete, and all I wanted was to disappear somewhere nobody knew my name. My best friend Noah refused to let me spend another weekend hiding in my apartment. He insisted I needed music, people, and one night where nobody expected perfection from me. That's how I found myself standing outside Pulse, one of the city's most popular gay clubs, nervously checking my reflection in the dark glass before stepping inside. Colored lights swept across the crowded room, while laughter blended with upbeat music that shook the floor beneath my sneakers. For the first time in weeks, nobody cared about quarterly reports, client revisions, or presentation decks. I ordered a sparkling water, found a quiet corner near the back, and simply watched people enjoying themselves without pretending to be anyone else. It felt strangely comforting. Then the entrance doors opened again. I barely noticed at first. Another group had arrived, dressed far more elegantly than everyone else. My eyes drifted toward them. Without much thought, the moment I recognized the familiar posture, my heartbeat stalled. Adrian Brooks, my boss. He wasn't wearing a business suit tonight. Instead, he wore a dark navy jacket over a simple black shirt, casual enough to blend in, yet somehow impossible to overlook. For one impossible second, I convinced myself I had imagined him. Maybe someone just looked remarkably similar. Then he turned his head, and our eyes met across the room. Recognition flashed over his face instantly. Every sound around me seemed to disappear. I looked away first, hoping the crowd would swallow me before he could react. Maybe he'd pretend he hadn't seen me. Maybe we'd both agree this never happened. I reached for my jacket, ready to slip quietly toward the exit, but before I could take a single step, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Adrian wasn't standing still. He wasn't avoiding me. He wasn't pretending either. He was walking directly toward me with calm, deliberate steps, never breaking eye contact. When he finally stopped only a few feet away, the faintest hint of relief crossed his normally unreadable expression. In a voice so quiet only I could hear, he said, "There you are. I've been looking for you." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Adrian Brooks stood in front of me as though the crowded club had disappeared, his calm gray eyes fixed on mine with an intensity one had never seen inside the office. I searched his expression for a hint of sarcasm or some elaborate joke, but there was nothing except quiet relief. "You have been looking for me?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. He gave a small nod before glancing over my shoulder. "Not here," he said gently. "Can we step outside for a minute?" Every sensible thought in my head told me this was a terrible idea. On Monday morning, he would still be my boss, and I would still be the designer trying to earn his respect. Crossing that invisible line could make everything awkward. Yet something about the way he scanned the room kept my curiosity alive. It was not fear. It was caution, as if he expected someone else to arrive at any second. We slipped through a side exit onto a quiet patio, where the music became a distant heartbeat behind brick walls. The cool evening air carried the scent of rain drifting in from the river a few blocks away. Adrian rested one hand lightly against the railing and finally looked directly at me again. "First," he said, "I owe you an apology." That was the last thing I expected to hear. "For what?" I asked. "For surprising you. And because I know this conversation is completely inappropriate outside of work." He paused, choosing every word with the same precision he used during board meetings. "But I did not come here by accident." My mind raced through every possible explanation. Had the company discovered something about me? Was there a business event nearby? None of it made sense. I do not understand, I admitted. Adrian let out a slow breath. A week ago someone sent me an anonymous email. My stomach tightened. What kind of email? No message. Only photographs. He watched my reaction carefully. Pictures of one of my employees entering this club on different weekends. My heartbeat became painfully loud. Me? He nodded once. The sender suggested that if I wanted to protect the company's reputation, I should know where certain employees spent their free time. I stared at him in disbelief. That is ridiculous. I agree, Adrian answered immediately. Your private life is your private life. It has nothing to do with your talent or your work. Relief washed over me for only a second before another question surfaced. Then why were you looking for me? His expression softened in a way I had never witnessed before. Because the email did not stop there. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, but hesitated before taking anything out. The sender claimed tonight would be the perfect opportunity to create a public scandal involving both of us. I frowned. Both of us. Adrian gave another careful glance toward the club entrance before lowering his voice. Whoever sent those messages knew I would come here tonight. They expected us to meet. The only thing I have not figured out yet is why someone wants the two of us in the same photograph. The drive home that night felt strangely unreal. Adrian insisted on calling a rideshare for me instead of letting me walk several blocks to the subway, and before we parted, he handed me a small business card with a number written neatly on the back. This is my private phone, he said. If anything unusual happens, call me directly. Do not use your company email or your office phone. I slipped the card into my wallet without knowing what to say. The man standing beside me was nothing like the distant executive who spent his mornings discussing budgets and deadlines. He looked tired, almost burdened, as though he had been carrying this problem alone for days. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the anonymous photographs Adrian had described. Who had been following me? Why would anyone care that I occasionally visited a place where I felt accepted? Even more confusing was the fact that someone had known Adrian would be there the same evening. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. Monday morning arrived far too quickly. The familiar glass tower looked exactly as it always had, yet everything felt different the moment I stepped through the revolving doors. Employees greeted one another with coffee cups in hand, while elevator chimes echoed through the marble lobby. I kept expecting someone to stare at me or whisper as I passed, but nobody seemed to notice anything unusual. Perhaps the mysterious sender had failed. Perhaps Adrian had overreacted. I almost convinced myself of that until I reached my desk. Resting perfectly in the center of my keyboard was a plain white envelope with no name and no company logo. My hands hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single printed photograph. It showed Adrian and me standing together outside the club, captured from across the street. The image itself was harmless. We were simply talking beside the patio railing. But across the bottom, someone had typed a single sentence in bold black letters. Secrets never stay hidden forever. My pulse quickened. I immediately looked around the open office, but everyone appeared busy answering emails or preparing for morning meetings. Whoever had left the envelope had blended in perfectly. Before I could decide what to do, my office phone rang. Ethan Carter. I answered as calmly as I could. Mr. Brooks would like to see you in his office immediately, his assistant said. The walk to the executive floor felt much longer than usual. Adrian was standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows when I entered, his jacket already off despite the early hour. He turned the moment he saw my face. You received one too, he said quietly. I froze. How did you know? Without answering, he slid another envelope across his desk. Inside was a different photograph taken from the same night. This one showed only him looking toward the club entrance moments before he found me. The message beneath it read, "You cannot protect him forever." Adrian folded his arms, his expression calm even though concern lingered in his eyes. Whoever is behind this has access to our building, he said. They wanted both of us to find these photographs before the workday began. I looked from the picture to Adrian, struggling to understand why someone would go to such lengths. Then another thought struck me. If they can reach your office and my desk, I whispered, they could be anyone working in this company. Adrian met my gaze without hesitation. That, he said, is exactly what worries me the most. The rest of Monday unfolded with an uneasy sense of normalcy that somehow felt more exhausting than open conflict. Adrian made one decision before I left his office. He announced that I would join the executive creative team for the launch of Brooks Creative's largest national campaign, a project scheduled to debut in less than 6 weeks. Officially, it was because my concept had earned the highest internal score during the preliminary review. Unofficially, it meant my desk was moved to the executive floor, only a short walk from his office. The announcement spread through the company before lunchtime. Most of my coworkers congratulated me with genuine smiles, but a few exchanged puzzled glances. I could almost hear the silent questions forming behind their polite expressions. Why had a mid-level designer suddenly been selected for such a prestigious assignment? By Tuesday morning, my schedule had changed completely. Instead of attending routine department meetings, I spent hours inside the executive conference room reviewing branding strategies, television storyboards, digital campaigns, and presentation drafts with Adrian and the senior leadership team. Watching him lead those meetings up close was surprisingly different from watching him across a boardroom. He never interrupted people simply to prove authority. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and somehow noticed details everyone else overlooked. The intimidating executive I had feared for months slowly revealed himself as someone driven more by responsibility than ego. Late that afternoon, the conference room finally emptied after another 3-hour planning session. I remained behind to organize presentation boards scattered across the table, while Adrian quietly stacked several folders into perfect alignment. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It simply felt honest. Finally, he looked toward the rain sliding down the tall windows overlooking the city. "Do you know why I started this company?" he asked unexpectedly. I smiled awkwardly. "I assumed you always wanted to run a business." A faint laugh escaped him, soft enough that I almost questioned whether I had actually heard it. Not even close. He leaned against the conference table, his professional mask fading just enough for me to glimpse the person beneath it. "I wanted to become an architect. I loved designing spaces where people felt welcome." He paused before continuing. Life had different plans. That simple sentence carried more weight than any speech he had delivered in a meeting. For the first time, I noticed how tired his eyes looked whenever he thought nobody was watching. Success had not erased whatever burden he carried. It had only hidden it behind polished boardrooms and expensive suits. Before I could ask another question, his assistant knocked gently on the open door and placed a small package on the table. "This arrived by courier, Mr. Brooks." There was no sender listed. She left without another word. Adrian frowned slightly as he opened the plain cardboard box. Inside sat a small silver picture frame. There was no photograph inside it, only a folded note. He unfolded the paper slowly, his expression becoming noticeably more serious with every passing second. Without speaking, he handed it to me. The message contained only one sentence. "Keep him close if you want to learn the truth about 5 years ago." I read the words twice before looking back at Adrian. 5 years ago? I whispered. His calm expression finally cracked. Just for an instant, genuine shock crossed his face. He looked at the note as though it had reached into a part of his life he had spent years trying to lock away. Then he met my eyes and quietly admitted something I never expected to hear. "Ethan, I do not think this is only about the company anymore. Whoever sent this knows something about my past that almost nobody else is supposed to remember." I stood there holding the note, while dozens of questions crowded my mind. Yet Adrian remained silent for several long seconds. The confident executive who always seemed to have every answer was suddenly searching for the right words. Finally, he took a slow breath and motioned toward the chairs beside the conference table. "There is something I have never told anyone at this company," he said quietly. "Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I wanted to leave it behind." I sat across from him, uncertain whether I should even be hearing this. Outside the conference room, employees continued walking through the hallway carrying laptops and coffee cups, completely unaware that my world had shifted again. Adrian rested his hands together before speaking. 5 years ago, before Brooks Creative became successful, I volunteered every Saturday at a community center for young people who had been rejected by their families. We offered career counseling, portfolio reviews, scholarships, and sometimes simply a place where people could feel accepted. His voice softened as memories returned. Those weekends mattered more to me than any business deal I have ever signed. I listened carefully beginning to understand why the anonymous message had affected him so deeply. Did something happen there? I asked. He nodded. Slowly. One afternoon, I met someone who reminded me why I wanted to build this company. He was talented, determined, and far more optimistic than his circumstances should have allowed. Adrian looked toward the rain-covered windows again, almost smiling at the memory. He talked about becoming a designer one day. I encouraged him to keep drawing, even when he doubted himself. Something about his description stirred a faint feeling of familiarity inside me, like hearing a melody I had not heard since childhood. Do you remember his name? I asked. Adrian answered without hesitation. Ethan. I stared at him in complete disbelief. That cannot be me. I was not certain at first, Adrian admitted. When you interviewed here 18 months ago, you looked familiar, but people change. Hairstyles change. Faces mature. I convinced myself I was imagining it. He opened a folder that had been sitting quietly beside his laptop and removed a faded brochure from the community center. Tucked inside was an old group photograph. The image had clearly been taken years earlier during a student design workshop. My eyes immediately found a much younger version of myself standing near the back, holding a sketchbook against my chest with an awkward smile. Standing only a few feet away was Adrian, dressed far more casually than I had ever seen him, smiling openly at the camera. I could barely remember that afternoon until another memory surfaced. A quiet volunteer had spent nearly an hour reviewing my drawings, telling me they deserved to be seen by more people. Before leaving, he had handed me a business card and said, "Keep creating. One day we might work together." I had forgotten his face, but never his encouragement. That was you, I whispered. Adrian gave a gentle nod. Yes, I never expected our paths to cross again. My heartbeat quickened as the missing pieces finally began fitting together. Before either of us could say another word, my phone vibrated against the conference table. It was a message from Noah containing only a photograph of the front entrance to Brooks Creative. Someone had taped another anonymous envelope to the company sign outside, where every employee and every visitor could see it by morning. My phone remained in my hand as Adrian studied the photograph Noah had sent me. The anonymous envelope taped neatly to the polished company sign was impossible to miss, positioned exactly where employees, clients, and delivery drivers would see it first thing the next morning. Adrian did not panic. He simply reached for his suit jacket and picked up his car keys. "Come with me," he said. "If we leave it there overnight, whoever planned this gets exactly what they want." Less than 15 minutes later, we stood outside the quiet office building. The city had settled into its evening rhythm, with only a few cars passing beneath the glowing streetlights. The envelope was still there, secured with clear tape as though someone had wanted to make certain it survived the night. Adrian carefully removed it without damaging the paper. There was no address, no fingerprints that we could see, and no company logo. Inside was another photograph. This one had been taken years earlier during the community center workshop. It showed Adrian standing beside me while I proudly held a sketchbook filled with rough design concepts. Across the bottom, someone had typed another message. "Some promises are never forgotten." I looked at Adrian in disbelief. Who would even have access to something this old? He slowly folded the photograph. Only a handful of volunteers kept records from those events. Most of the files were donated to the community center archives after the program closed. His thoughtful expression told me he was already running through names in his mind. Before either of us spoke again, headlights swept across the parking lot. A black sedan rolled slowly past the building entrance before disappearing around the corner. Neither of us could identify the driver, but Adrian instinctively memorized the license plate before it vanished from sight. "Interesting," he murmured. "That car has been parked outside our office twice this week." The next morning, the executive conference room filled earlier than usual. Department heads gathered to discuss the campaign launch while I quietly organized presentation materials. The atmosphere felt normal until the director of human resources entered carrying a tablet with an unusually serious expression. "Someone submitted an anonymous complaint overnight," she announced. Every conversation stopped. Adrian remained calm. "About what?" She hesitated before answering. "The complaint suggests there may be favoritism involving a recent promotion to the executive creative team. It specifically questions Ethan Carter's sudden assignment." Every eye in the room shifted toward me. My face grew warm, but Adrian never looked away from the human resources director. "Was any evidence provided?" he asked evenly. She shook her head. Only copies of several anonymous photographs showing the two of you speaking outside a local club. Silence settled across the room. The photographs revealed nothing inappropriate. They simply showed two adults having a conversation. Yet whoever had submitted them clearly hoped appearance alone would create suspicion. Adrian folded his hands on the conference table. Mr. Carter earned his position through the highest creative evaluation in the department. Every scoring document has already been reviewed by 3 independent directors. If anyone wishes to audit that decision, they are welcome to do so. His steady confidence immediately changed the tone of the meeting. No one challenged him. As people gradually returned to discussing campaign deadlines, I noticed one person who had not spoken a single word. Daniel Mercer, the senior strategy director, quietly closed his notebook while watching me with an unreadable expression. As the meeting ended, everyone filed into the hallway except Daniel. He paused beside my chair just long enough to offer a polite smile. "Congratulations again, Ethan," he said pleasantly. "It is amazing how quickly someone's life can change when the right person remembers them from 5 years ago." Daniel's comment lingered in my mind long after he disappeared down the hallway. He had spoken so casually, yet there had been something deliberate behind every word. He knew about the community center. He knew it had happened 5 years ago. Most importantly, he wanted me to know that he knew. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on campaign revisions, but every idea on my computer screen blurred into the same unanswered question. How many people inside this company were aware of Adrian's past? Just before 6 o'clock, Adrian stopped beside my desk. "Walk with me," he said quietly. We left through a private elevator that opened onto the underground parking garage instead of the crowded lobby. As we reached his car, he remained unusually thoughtful. "Daniel Mercer joined Brooks Creative 4 years ago," Adrian explained once we were on the road. "Before that, he worked for a consulting firm that specialized in corporate acquisitions. He is intelligent, ambitious, and very good at reading people." I looked over at him. "Do you trust him?" Adrian did not answer immediately. "I trust his ability. Trusting his intentions has become more complicated." We drove across town until the skyline gave way to quieter streets lined with old brick buildings. Adrian finally parked beside a modest community center with a freshly painted rainbow mural near the entrance. The building looked welcoming despite its age. Children were leaving with parents while several volunteers stacked folding chairs inside the lobby. "This is where everything began," Adrian said softly. "The old center closed years ago. This organization opened in the same neighborhood and continues the same mission." As soon as we stepped inside, an older woman arranging donated books looked up and smiled warmly. "Adrian," she said with genuine happiness. "It has been too long." Adrian introduced me to Margaret Ellis, the program director. She shook my hand kindly before studying my face for a moment. "You look familiar," she said. Adrian smiled faintly. "I think you met Ethan years ago." Margaret's eyes widened with recognition. "The young artist with the sketchbook." I laughed in disbelief. "You actually remember me?" "Some people leave an impression," she replied. "You certainly did." We spent nearly an hour touring classrooms where teenagers worked on photography, graphic design, and college applications. Everywhere we went, people greeted Adrian with sincere gratitude instead of formal respect. No one called him Mr. Brooks or Chief Executive Officer. To them, he was simply Adrian, the volunteer who had quietly funded scholarships and equipment without asking for recognition. Watching him interact with everyone made me realize how little I had truly known about the man who signed my performance reviews. As we prepared to leave, Margaret handed Adrian a thin folder she had discovered while reorganizing storage cabinets. "I almost forgot," she said. "Someone asked about these records a few months ago. They claimed they were researching former volunteers." Adrian opened the folder and quickly scanned the visitor request form clipped to the front. His expression immediately hardened. He handed the paper to me without saying a word. The signature at the bottom belonged to Daniel Mercer. Before I could react, my phone buzzed with a message from Noah. There was no text, only a photograph taken inside a downtown coffee shop. Daniel was sitting across from someone I recognized instantly. It was my coworker Olivia, one of my closest friends at Brooks Creative, and between them on the table rested a stack of the same anonymous photographs that had been appearing all week. The photograph Noah had sent stayed on my phone screen during the entire drive back to the city. Daniel Mercer and Olivia looked completely relaxed, as though they were simply discussing an ordinary project over coffee, yet the stack of anonymous photographs between them changed everything. Olivia had been one of the first people to welcome me when I joined Brooks Creative. She had patiently explained company procedures, invited me to team lunches, and even stayed late more than once to help me finish client presentations. The idea that she could somehow be involved felt impossible. Adrian glanced at the image once more before returning his attention to the road. "Do not make assumptions yet," he said calmly. "A single photograph never tells the whole story." I knew he was right, but uncertainty settled heavily in my chest. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Brooks Creative had changed. Conversations stopped whenever executives passed through the hallways. Rumors had clearly spread beyond the leadership team, although nobody seemed to know exactly what was happening. Shortly before 10 o'clock, every department received a company-wide calendar invitation for an emergency meeting in the main auditorium. Employees quietly filled the room while managers exchanged uneasy glances. I took a seat near the front, scanning the crowd until I spotted Olivia a few rows away. She looked nervous, repeatedly checking her phone before finally noticing me. Instead of smiling as she usually did, she looked away almost immediately. A few minutes later, Adrian stepped onto the stage. His expression was composed, but there was a quiet determination in his voice that I had never heard before. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. "Over the past several days, anonymous messages and photographs have been distributed inside this company in an apparent attempt to question both professional decisions and personal reputations." The room became perfectly silent. Adrian continued without hesitation. "Brooks Creative was built on respect, fairness, and integrity. Every promotion, including recent assignments, has followed documented evaluations reviewed by multiple departments. Those records remain available for independent audit at any time." Several employees nodded while others exchanged thoughtful looks. Then Adrian paused for just a moment. "I also want to address another matter directly. Photographs have circulated showing me speaking with Ethan Carter outside of business hours. Those photographs are authentic. We had a private conversation after discovering anonymous attempts to manipulate both of us. There is nothing inappropriate about two adults having a conversation in a public place." I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me, but Adrian continued speaking before whispers could begin. "No employee at this company will ever be judged because of lawful personal activities outside the workplace. That principle applies equally to everyone, beginning with me." His words changed the atmosphere almost instantly. Fear gave way to quiet respect. At the back of the auditorium, I noticed Daniel watching the stage with an expression that was impossible to read. Just as Adrian prepared to conclude the meeting, the auditorium doors opened. Olivia walked inside carrying a thick manila folder pressed tightly against her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained clear. "Mr. Brooks," she called. Every person in the room turned toward her. She slowly stepped into the center aisle and looked first at Adrian, then at me. "I cannot stay silent anymore," she said. "I know who has been creating the anonymous messages, and I have proof. But before I hand this over, there is something Ethan deserves to hear from me first." The auditorium became so quiet that I could hear the soft hum of the projector above the stage. Olivia walked steadily toward Adrian, holding the thick folder with both hands as though she had been carrying its weight for far longer than a single morning. She stopped a few feet away and looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Daniel Mercer asked me to help organize old company records several weeks ago. At first, I thought it was a normal research project connected to our anniversary campaign. Then he began asking questions about Adrian's volunteer work, the community center, and whether I knew anything about you." She lowered her eyes for a moment before continuing. "When I realized he was collecting private information instead of company history, I refused to help. That is when I secretly started making copies of everything I could find." She handed the folder to Adrian. Inside were printed emails, courier receipts, visitor logs from the community center, and messages linking every anonymous package to Daniel's personal instructions. There was even a draft presentation outlining his plan to convince the board that Adrian's leadership had become compromised so he could position himself as the company's next chief executive officer. The room remained silent as Adrian carefully closed the folder. Daniel slowly rose from his seat near the back of the auditorium. For the first time since I had met him, The confidence behind his polished smile had disappeared. He looked around the room before quietly saying, "I believe the company needed different leadership." Adrian met his gaze with the same calm professionalism he had shown from the beginning. "Strong leadership is built through trust," he replied, "not through fear or manipulation." Daniel offered no further explanation. Company legal counsel and the board representatives requested that he surrender his employee identification badge while the matter moved through the organization's formal review process. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, only the quiet consequences of choices that had finally come to light. As employees gradually left the auditorium, many paused beside my chair to offer kind words and congratulations for the campaign that would soon launch nationwide. The uncertainty that had shadowed the office for days seemed to lift with every conversation. Several weeks later, our campaign premiered exactly on schedule. It became one of the most successful creative projects in the company's history, earning praise not only for its design, but also for its message of authenticity and belonging. Life inside Brooks Creative slowly returned to normal, although it felt like a better version of normal. Adrian no longer seemed distant behind carefully constructed walls. He still expected excellence, but people also saw the compassion that had always guided his decisions. One evening after the celebration for the campaign's success, we stood together on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city skyline, glowing beneath the setting sun. The same person who had once seemed completely unreachable now smiled with an ease I had never imagined during my first day at the company. "5 years ago," he said quietly, "I told a young designer to keep creating because our paths might cross again." I laughed softly. "I never imagined you would become my boss." He smiled. "Neither did I." We stood there for another quiet moment before he added, "Whatever happens next, I would rather build it honestly than hide behind assumptions." I looked across the city that had brought our lives together twice without either of us realizing it, until fate finally refused to let us walk past each other again. Sometimes the most important opportunities do not begin with perfect timing. Sometimes they begin with kindness remembered across the years, the courage to protect another person's dignity, and a single unexpected meeting that changes 2 lives forever.